Good morning. I'm Susan McPherson. I'm the founder and CEO of McPherson Strategies and the author of The Lost Art of Connecting. And I am so thrilled today to be interviewing a fellow member of the Women's Forum, Lin Coughlin. And let me give you a little bit of background on Lin, and then we're going to jump into a short Q&A so you can learn more about Lin and her wonderful work. Lin is the president and founder of Great Circle Associates, providing interim executive and strategic advisory services to leaders who need to envision transformative strategies and plan and implement those strategies. She also coaches executives who are at inflection points in their careers, and quite frankly, who's not, new CEOs, executives who have been assigned to lead a major change initiative, and executives who are planning for an exit. A former operating exec and general manager at global organizations, she has extensive experience serving on and chairing boards for profit and nonprofit organizations. Welcome, Lin. Good to see you.
Thank you, Susan. It's good to be here.
So let's dive right in. How did you get your idea for the Great Circle Associates? And after you share that, what inspires you?
What inspires me? Well, first of all, just by way of background, I grew up in corporate America and spent the last 15, 20 years of my career in a number of operating roles, leading highly transformative initiatives, not because I had planned on it, but it's just where I landed. And in the process, I frankly learned an awful lot about the art and science of leading disruptive change that is enduring. And I got myself to an inflection point in corporate America where I began thinking about my legacy and what I was going to do in the future and that kind of thing. And ultimately realized that what I really wanted to do was to spend time with great leaders like you and others, helping you to enact big, significant departures from the status quo. And that's what I've been doing now for 10 years. I came up with the name Great Circle Associates because if you're a mariner or an aviator, you're aware of the Great Circle route. It's not the A to B line on a map. It's the route that gets followed in a circular motion around the hemisphere of the Earth. And it's very much guided by the winds and the tides and so forth. It's very unpredictable. And I felt like it was a great metaphor for the whole process of leading and managing and executing on disruptive change. And so hence the name Great Circle Associates.
It makes sense because I think if anything we've learned in the last couple of years is nothing is predictable and change is a constant.
Yes, more so.
Yeah. And what inspires you?
Yes, what inspires me? Well, I'm reminded of a quote from a 19th century orator who said, "When we rise when we give to others." And really what inspires me is the opportunity to work with great leaders and high potential leaders and leadership teams who are truly committed to becoming great change masters and frankly, great leaders in their organizations and otherwise. And we spend lots of time on understanding not only what the business model considerations are all about from an internal and external standpoint, but also understanding what their strengths and maybe weaknesses are and how to work with them very, very specifically. But I derive a huge amount of satisfaction and inspiration from my work, Susan, and I frankly don't consider it as work. It's really quite a fulfillment to me, as I know your work is to you.
Most days.
There you go.
Um, what was the key driving force in becoming an entrepreneur? Right. I mean, you had worked for years in major companies, et cetera. So tell us about the transition and why.
It was, it's interesting that you ask. Every once in a while, I'll be honest, every once in a while, I think to myself, I had one more gig in me in corporate America. I should have gone for that one more gig. And in fact, I had a number of opportunities at this inflection point in my career, including some very interesting opportunities in Silicon Valley, in CEO roles and COO roles. And frankly, somehow it just wasn't clicking for me, and it bothered me because I really just assumed I would go on to take on a role, one of those roles. And I ended up doing a lot of soul searching, spent some time with some trusted colleagues. And what I finally realized, Susan, was that, I had spent all these years, 10 to 15 years, working around the clock on these big, messy change initiatives. And in the process, I was the type of leader that was very much of a mentor and coach. And I was always, very much focused on helping particularly my leadership team members to exceed their own expectations and show them that they could run through walls and that kind of thing. And, when I was really honest with myself, getting back to your earlier question of what inspires me, that's what I realized really inspired me. And there was an opportunity for me potentially to share all of that experience and knowledge. And so I went for it.
I love it. I love it. On that note, you recently wrote an article in Forbes called Breaking Through the Shackles of Imposter Syndrome. As someone who deals every other day, maybe every third day with imposter syndrome, can you elaborate more on this article?
Yes.
And how have you personally dealt with imposter syndrome? I do believe it's an epidemic of women leaders. And I think we need to collectively solve it because we're doing the real work.
You got that right, my friend. You got that right. Well, first of all, let me just be very transparent and say I've always suffered from imposter syndrome. And I started really getting interested in it, in the whole topic, in the course of coaching men and women leaders, and really I was very interested in getting to the bottom of just exactly what it is and what can be done to cope with it, the kinds of questions that you're asking. One of the first pieces of information that I discovered is that 70% of professionals, men and women, have suffered at some point and do suffer from imposter syndrome. And, they include people like Howard Schultz of Starbucks and Michelle Obama and the woman who is the COO of Yahoo, the great Sonia Mayor, many people who that we know and love in pop culture who really do suffer from it. And so my first point to you, and I remind myself of this every once in a while, is to realize that you're not alone. You are not alone. This is an affliction that permeates the leadership around the country, if not the world. And it's really something you have to face up to. I have really come up with a few habits, if you will, that I think can help to cope with imposter syndrome, which, by the way, just to clarify, it's the situation where you fear that others may have overinflated impressions of you and your capabilities. And to go along with that fear, you live in constant anticipation of being discovered as a fraud. And it's a very stressful situation. I've got a great quote that is somewhere here that as I go, I'll share with you from Howard Schultz. But so the first thing to help you with coping with it is that you've really got to not forget that the status quo is not sustainable. And I'm really speaking, I'm speaking in the context of what happens as a change leader more than anything else. Okay. You have to recognize it when it emerges, and you need, and I know that sounds probably pretty basic, but it's really important to be uber aware of one's propensity to go into that deep, dark hole and know that you're in that moment. Like I said, remember that you're not alone. 70% of your colleagues, either now or at some point, have suffered from it. Deal with the fear in the moment. Go after it, get real clear, get complete acceptance. The second A, the first is awareness, the second is acceptance. Become completely aware of why it is, how it is that you're feeling. Be thinking about what your roots are, your background, what's triggering you, those kinds of thoughts. And then you begin to put things in perspective when you go there. And then finally, you really want to start to try to visualize what successful outcomes are going to be in a situation, remembering that you're in that situation because you are skilled and expert and are respected and sought after by your colleagues. Mm-hmm. And you have lots in the way of credentials, and you've really got to therefore give yourself permission to imagine what success might look like. And then finally, the inevitable setbacks occur, right? Once you have decided to move ahead and execute and go forward, and you've really got to think about the setbacks that occur as learning opportunities, not as failures, but as learning opportunities, and to do it oftentimes in a very inclusive way with your stakeholders, your key stakeholders, can be a very emboldening experience for all, including you. So those are just a few thoughts on how to cope with imposter syndrome, but it's an insidious affliction that too many people suffer from, men and women.
I think you just gave us all a coaching session. Thank you, Lynn.
You're welcome, Susan. My pleasure.
For those of you tuning in, please have your notebook because there's some tidbits of gold to take away. And I think that leads into my next question.
Sure.
What advice would you give to some aspiring entrepreneurs? You know, and I don't mean to limit this to just women, but it is the Women's Forum. And we know that the fastest growing individuals choosing entrepreneurship are women, and specifically women of color. So,
that's right.
But overall, what advice would you be giving?
Well, first of all, I think of entrepreneurialism as a leadership strength. And you can be an entrepreneur, in my view, owning your own business, but also in corporate America. I was an entrepreneur in corporate America. I successfully turned around a couple of large businesses. I did 2 internal startups that were very, very successful. So entrepreneurialism is alive and well everywhere. It's just that we typically read about it when we think about people who have their own businesses. And my advice to aspiring entrepreneurs in corporate America and not corporate America is to really be aware of and go for the opportunities, the problems that need to be solved that no one else wants to take on. Usually, if you think about it, the only way you can go is up when there is a problem to be solved, right?
Right.
Now, you may get into a situation where you may not go the whole distance in terms of problem solving, the solution to the problem. But the chances are high that if you raise your hand and you be very thoughtful about the planning of what you're about to do, as I did when I raised my hand at one point to help out with a massive integration and restructuring need that happened, that occurred as a result of an acquisition the company I was with made. It, you know, it puts you on the map, Susan. It really does. It puts you on the map, and it gives you also permission to make mistakes, to be vulnerable. The fact that you volunteered for it, people really honor and respect that, especially your superiors to whom you've made the offer. It's had payoff for me continuously in my career when I have done that.
Speaking of your career, what is an unexpected event that happened, and how
Well,
did
an unexpected event is that I started my own consulting practice. I honestly, it was when I first began the journey, that sort of very reflective journey. It never, when I was myself at an inflection point in a big job in corporate America, it was a very exciting time. It never occurred to me that I would ever think about starting my own consulting practice. And in fact, as I said earlier, that I have to admit, every once in a while on some of those hard days, I say to myself, "Ah, should I have gone for that one more gig? I know I had one more in me, but I decided not to do it. Was it the right decision?" But so it was a big, big surprise to me
yeah,
that I pivoted in that way. And basically I never looked back.
I have to agree. Same story with
Is
me.
that right?
Yeah, it was, but for me, it wasn't just a leap. It was more like a placeholder until I found my next job, and then that was 9 years ago. So
Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Well, congratulations, Susan.
thank you. I joke that I'm an accidental entrepreneur, but it's always interesting to hear from people who have made the choice and made it, with gusto.
Exactly, exactly. Well, I'm happy. You seem very happy and content with your work, and which tells me you must be adding so much value all the time.
I am fortunate to be surrounded by a group that adds value.
There you go. There you go. One of my objectives, primary objectives, is to constantly learn from my clients. And in my view, the flip side of that is once a client, always a friend, right?
Yeah, you win,
Right?
right? That should
Those
be
are
the
the
goal.
best relationships.
Yeah, exactly. You've touched on this briefly, but what were some of the challenges that you faced?
The challenges that I faced, honestly, I'll say came later in my career, um, when I when I became a managing director and an operating executive at a large asset management firm where I was the youngest managing director and the youngest operating executive, and someone who just innately was not comfortable with the status quo. And I was always, looking for opportunities to improve, to position for continuous change and that kind of thing. And I was in a very male dominated culture that was also averse to change.
Hmm.
So, and when I got into these leadership roles, where it was all about being less so doing, right? And enabling others around me to do the doing. The doing that I wanted was, in many, many cases, involved disruptive change from the status quo. And I had to learn how to inspire stakeholders and communicate with them around the benefits that would accrue in situations that might involve a significant departure from the status quo. And it took me a long time. It took me a long time, and it took an incredible amount of patience and diplomacy, especially with senior people.
In our remaining few minutes, I'd
Yes.
love to gather and ask you what advice you have for the next generation of entrepreneurs.
Oh, that's such a big question, and such a good question, Susan. The next generation of entrepreneurs. Well, I start off with an assumption that the generation of entrepreneurs that are aspiring at this point are, among other things, extremely purpose driven. And I am absolutely a believer that first and foremost, in any kind of organizational setting, for profit, not for profit, big corporation, small corporation, whatever, that everything begins and ends with your values and your purpose. And the purpose needs to be measurable. Your vision needs to flow from your purpose. And I would say to the generation that is coming into their own at this point, really don't give up on your purpose driven commitment, because it just, if you've got that, human beings respond so well to it in so many different ways.
100%. Well, Lynn, this was a joy, and I really enjoyed
Joy.
getting to know you a bit better. And I'm excited for the members of the the Women's Forum of New York to be able to learn more about you.
Great.
Will you let everyone know where they can find you?
Yes. Would you like me to share that with you right now?
Yeah.
Okay. You can reach me at lin.coughlin at greatcircleassociates.com, and my website is www.greatcircleassociates.com.
Lovely. Well, thank you again, and wishing you and all our listeners a wonderful day.
Thank you, Susan, and to you, and a wonderful rest of the week, my friend.